I will give people 3 minutes. Thank you. And I will give people 3 minutes who would like to speak. And does anyone like to speak? You could raise your hand or wave wildly at the screen. I don't see anyone. Does anyone else see anyone waving wildly at the screen?
I don't see anyone, Jean.
In that case, we will continue. Thanks. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so in that case, the approval of the minutes of the August 10th meeting. I think I mislabeled something, but those are the ones that start with Peter Hoyt having privilege of the floor. I didn't get anything back from anyone, so in that case, would someone like to move those?
This is Barb. I'll just make a comment that the file name, I think, was named the prior minute. So when it's finalized, the file name should probably be the correct date.
I changed them this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay. Other than that, I move approval.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. Let me write that down. All those in favor say aye.
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 Great, thank you. Those are passed. The next thing on the agenda is a town council report. Tim?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the return of the heat. I just wanted to let you know that we're on Zoom tonight is because we've had to close the town hall for because of some potential COVID exposure, which seems like it's probably going to be okay, but I thought we should err on the side of caution tonight, and we'll see how things go in the next week or two. And I think also the town board will be considering some new guidelines for further safe use of the town hall as we go forward, as this new variant of COVID seems to be raising its ugly self in an aggressive way. I also just wanted to take a second to kind of follow up on the discussion at the end of the last meeting from the town board's point of view. And I just want to remind everybody very, very quickly of the background of the Zoning Commission and its charge. The Zoning Commission came out of the development of a revised comprehensive plan. And as a result of some of the things recommended in the comprehensive plan, I just want to remind you that we did establish a task force that met all last fall weekly in a very, very intense fashion. And the results of that task force was the recommendation of the establishment of the Zoning Commission. All of that was preceded, since elections had been mentioned and things like that last meeting. I just want to remind everybody that we did have an election 2 falls ago in which planning and zoning were very, very on the table topics, and the election was settled. We also had another occasion the following spring as a result of a proposal to situate a commercial business in town. The town board was presented with a petition with over 750 signatures, and not only recommending, but insisting on further developments in planning. So all of that background stands behind the establishment of the Zoning Commission. And the Zoning Commission itself, just to recall the charge, is to provide to the town board recommendations for zoning. Or consider whether or not we should have zoning, and the public hearings that the town board will entertain those issues. For the Zoning Commission, public hearings really should be focused on how to achieve recommendations for zoning, which we hope you will be able to do and finish by March. So we'll have ample time to move forward to meet the moratorium. So I just wanted to, since there seemed to be still some confusion about all of this in the last meeting, I just wanted to hope that this very, very concise reminder of the background will be helpful and clear. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Tim. Anyone have any other questions? Nothing else, Tim? Okay. The next thing is the planning committee. Val?
Well, I think I should cede to Bill Padoka, who's now essentially here and has been the chair of the actual planning committee, and he can keep us up to date on all of the incredible intrigue involved with batteries and applications.
Okay.
Val, I didn't prepare a speech. I was sure that you were going, but yeah, at our last meeting, the planning board, is at the penultimate stage of the battery law. The battery law is done, other than basically proofreading and various fine details. So as far as the planning board itself is concerned, the battery law is finished. There are two companion pieces. One is a permit for, I would not call them small, battery systems up to about 600 kilowatt hours, which is definitely sort of a business size commercial scale, but not like, what a power company would use, but what a small business might have. So there's a battery permit piece and also a battery checklist for the inspectors to use. So all those three pieces are done, other than some fine detail work where we're going to the code officer and give us a little advice, electrical inspector give us a little advice, and one of our members, Will Lawrence, you guys know, is doing a careful proofreading of the law. And so there'll be a few I's dotted and T's crossed and wording clarified as a result of Will's work. So as a committee, we are done with the law. And so that's being set aside, and all the other stuff will happen offline, mostly between Will and myself, and then that will get passed on to the town board. So yeah, we are done, and feel pretty good with the state of the law and what it provides for the town in terms of guidance. So that's that, and we, with that, sort of have decided we'll stop meeting independently, and our only meeting is part of the zoning commission now.
Great. So congratulations on that work being final, and also welcome Bill and Will. And Jonathan, I don't think is able to be with us tonight.
Jonathan has decided that he has other things that turned out to be more pressing, and so he's finding a hard time finding the time, and so he has decided to resign from the planning board and therefore from the zoning commission. And I assume Patrick will be involved in general, but I don't see him yet tonight.
Patrick has a conflict with this meeting on the second Tuesday, not the second Tuesday. We are on the fourth Tuesday. He has a meeting with this. He has a conflict with this meeting on the fourth Tuesday. Tim is raising his hand.
Yeah, speaking of conflicts, I meant to mention this. I'm looking at the calendar. It turns out that the second Tuesday of September is actually the first Tuesday of September. So in other words, 2 weeks from now would be the 7th of September, which is the first Tuesday of September, and that's a town board meeting. So the zoning commission will have to switch its date on that day.
Right, we'll be on the 14th. We will be on the 14th, which is the second Tuesday. Is that right, then? Does that make sense, Tim?
If I guess if that's what you want to do, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that works. We'll be on the 14th and the 28th then in September. And also welcome to Will. So we have Will and Patrick and Bill joining the board, the zoning commission officially as of right now. You're welcome. We will soon be giving you assignments to do. So that's the next thing on the agenda is looking at the maps prepared by the consultants and the layers and discussing these. And before we get to that, just though I wanted to add one thing, which is that we asked people to go and look at the maps if they had a chance this last week, and to think about things that we wanted to add to a checklist before we had a public meeting, so that we would think of ways to make sure that we're reaching the public. And again, look at the purposes. So I hope people had a chance to do that. I unfortunately didn't have a chance to look at the maps because I was out of town till Saturday. And then we weren't able to get into the town hall yesterday or today. So, but I will go down and look at them, and I did look at them again on my computer. So Nan and Rick, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Well, thanks, Jean. And hi, everybody. You know, I want to leave most of the meeting for you guys to really dive in and discuss. I did want to just kind of set the stage for where I hope we can get to, is to have a little more definition about what kind of zoning scenario you feel will meet the needs of the town. At this point, you know, writing the section by section and the nitty gritty of the law, we're not there yet. We need to have some definition of where you want to go with the zoning districts, what you want to accomplish with each zoning district that you choose to have. And in general, once we know what the zoning district's purpose is, then a general direction on what kinds of things you want to see happen in that district. It's from that direction that Rick and I will fill in the nitty gritty for you. So, you know, at this stage, I'd like to encourage you to, you know, really focus on the maps and the districts and the purposes of each one, so that you can come up with a scenario or a couple, you know, winnow it down from 4 or 5 to, you know, 2 that you feel comfortable with. I think it was at that point that we had talked about then going to the public so that they have something to react to. And then, you know, so it's the direction that, as your consultants, that, you know, I don't want to just start writing zoning without knowing what direction you want to head in. So I really encourage you all to use the meeting tonight to try and focus in on, go back to the purpose statements that we did, I think, our first meeting or our second meeting, and go back to that comprehensive list of actions that the comprehensive plan talked about addressing via zoning. So that's our marching orders, is there. And so once Rick and I have that kind of general direction and we have some feedback from the community, then what we'll do is flesh out the details, and then you will have something concrete to react to. I think that that it's very difficult to write a zoning law from scratch by committee, but it's much easier to react to something that's either yes, you like it, or no, you don't, or how we need to tweak it so it meets whatever needs you have. So I'd like to encourage you to efficiently get to establishing the direction so that we can start moving forward and filling in that nitty gritty detail, because there's going to be a lot of review on your part once we have it fleshed out. It'll be a rough draft, but we have to start somewhere. So I just wanted to add that to kind of frame your discussions and encourage you. I had sent out after the last meeting that decision matrix to try and give you some more background information on how each one of those options could perform for you, and then left at the very end kind of a blank table for you to tell us, what do you like, what feels comfortable to meet the comprehensive plan goals that are established, what kinds of regulations and development standards do you hope to see within those areas. And you know, so I think this is mostly your discussion, and Rick is here tonight to answer any kind of map, boundary, resource kind of issues. And I hope we'll take lots of notes and that at the end of the meeting, we have a little more clarity on where you want to head. So with that, I guess I would like to, I don't know if any of you have had a chance to actually put your thoughts together option by option, but I'd like to start with what are the things about each option that you like? So I don't know, Jean, if you want to just have people raise their hand or if you want to go around, you know, like a round table, that's up to you.
Why don't we ask people to raise their hand as they start? Yeah, why don't we start? And does anyone want to volunteer to go first? Put your hand up. Don't be shy. Ernie,
I'm
Okay,
putting my
great.
hand up.
great.
So I guess that I would like to kind of start off by saying that, you know, maybe we should take option 4 and just toss it out and quit discussing it, because I don't think anybody wants to divide the town into, you know, a bunch of different zones that would, you know, unless somebody differs with that. I'm just going to throw that out there. Just try to simplify this whole process.
Well,
Michelle?
I would like to jump in and just kind of gear everybody back to, I think it's important that rather than throwing things out, I appreciate your comments, but I'd like to hear what people feel as that we have 4 options plus mix and match of these. What do you see as the benefits of
Okay.
the options? I
Okay.
guess I'd like
All
to
right.
start with what are
So
the
let me-
benefits that we see?
Let me start over again. Benefit for the one zone option is its ultimate simplicity. We don't have to draw any lines. I think that's, you know, I mean, there clearly, there are differences in how the town is put together, but I could see a zoning regulation written that had enough, you know, definitions and permutations and overlays that it could cover the town quite nicely without having to designate any other divisions. So that's option 1.
How about others? Other people jump in?
Anyone?
Yeah,
Well,
so
I'm unclear on whether we're gonna, like, Ernie should talk about options 1 through 4, and then each of us does that, or I'll have a really hard time saying what I like about an option without saying what I don't like about an option. So I'm a little unclear on the process, but it might be easier to say, here's what we each like about options 1, 2, 3, and 4, and what we also don't like about them. Maybe that's too much information at one time. So Jean, what do you think? Because I'll have a hard time
think that's-
talking one.
I agree with you. And what I heard Ernie say was he liked option 1 because of its simplicity and he didn't like option 4. Ernie, is there anything you want to say about options 2 and 3?
I will add into that. The way I see it is that, you know, these 4 options are different levels of complexity. Option 1 being the simplest, option 4 being the most complex. The option where we have you know, 2 zones, you know, hamlet zones and everything else, I think is a very likely scenario that we will probably head towards. But I would say that what I find to be a little bit difficult about it is that I kind of see the Route 79 corridor as a very different thing than any other of the hamlets. And so, you know, I'm starting to kind of say, well, then option 3, which looks at each hamlet separately, is kind of a possibility if it were, all right, we're going to do Route 79 corridor as one set of regulations, and then the other hamlets as another set of regulations, and then everything else. And so I think that I could like any one of those things pretty well. The last thing where we, you know, start to just kind of micro zone everything into whatever compartment it's already in just doesn't make any sense. Doesn't create a fabric for planning for a future. It just looks at, okay, this is what we got. Let's try to control it so it doesn't change. So that's it.
Okay, so Bill is next, and then I think I saw Barbara's hand after that.
Okay. Good. So I differ fairly strongly from Ernie, though where he wound up is sort of where I may in the end wind up, which is I think that we need a little more. Option one, yes, what I like about it is that it's sort of simple, one big zone. Though when you add in the overlays, it actually gets really complex because what regs apply to you will depend on maybe 4 or 5 different overlays, and you have to remember to do that. And the map gets very confusing when you put all the overlays on, and that might actually make it look confusing to residents of the town. But I basically, so what I don't like about it though is that it gives no fine control at all over where, say, commercial enterprises locate. And I don't think how you can do that well with the overlays. So I personally strongly favor any option that gives us an ability to sort of focus development. And that means I really want hamlet zones for sure. And then the real question is whether we have additional commercial zones like along the 79 corridor or a part of that. So for me, my final thing, I'm going to come down to like a hybrid of option 3 and 4, but to go with option 2, it's relatively simple, where you have hamlets and everything else. That's cool, that's great. But I think that it really does a disservice by not recognizing the differences between Brooktondale, Sladeville Springs, Speedsville, and what you guys are calling the Bessemer area. So what I don't like about option 2 is that it lumps all the hamlets together, and I really don't think the same regs would really work well for all the different hamlets. For example, I think that it might well be that certain kinds of commercial enterprises are totally appropriate for Sladeville Springs, particularly along Route 79, but totally inappropriate in Brooktondale. So I kind of like 3 and 4 where each hamlet is different. And I'm okay, and this is a discussion point for later. I want to understand a bit better the difference of using an overlay versus a zone. So I think what I like about option 3 is that you have the flexibility between the hamlets. I'm a little worried about, again, the use of overlays that might be confusing to people, confusing to me. And for option 4, I agree that maybe slicing the top into zones where this is what it always is kind of a little, I don't know, overbearing. So my suggestion is something between option 3 and 4, where we have different hamlets. We don't have an industrial zone, because my actual preference, I think expressed before, is to have that area revert to a residential and a town park. That we have a commercial area along part of Route 79. I do differ with the Sladeville Springs hamlet as drawn. I think it engulfs too much good farmland, but we can get to that detail later. But that's, so there's some fine differences, but I would go for something that has different hamlets. Basically everything else, I'm okay if there's an ag overlay to help protect farmland, as opposed to an ag zone. So something like option 3 with an added commercial zone, or option 4 where basically the ag zone gets submerged and becomes an ag overlay and you get rid of the industrial zone. So that's where I'm at, I guess, in terms of things.
Thank you, Bill. Barbara.
Oh, and I want to say one more thing. Sorry, I apologize. I think in terms of coming to the public, a great option would be to have something like option 2. Very simple, because I think we do have hamlets, but all the hamlets are the same and everything else. And then something that's a bit more complicated, like, okay, the hamlets are different, and then we have some differences even, what's allowed in that more rural area. So that might be a good set of things to go public with. Okay, end of story.
Okay, good. Hi, Patrick, welcome. I want to say that what we're doing now is taking turns. Ernie just went, and Bill, and now Barbara, and we're going through the options that were sent to you and saying what you like about them and what you don't. So Barbara will demonstrate.
Well, Maybe not demonstrate. I have a question first, though. Can I ask a clarifying question and then do my
Sure,
preferences?
absolutely.
Okay, so my clarifying question is, I think it's for Nan. I'm just would like to understand what the difference is, in this, zoning definitions between commercial versus retail. Like, what kind of stuff is included in commercial versus like if you had a zone with mixed use that allowed residential and retail. I mean, does that mean something different, or is is commercial like a thing that is clearly defined?
It depends on how you want to go. I mean, a commercial district is typically one that the primary use are a variety of commercial uses, not just retail. It could be service, offices, restaurants, something other than residential. So a typical kind of commercial zone would be oriented to a variety of commercial uses. It could also be a mixed use zone that allows a variety of commercial uses along with a variety of different kinds of residential uses. And I just got my pen. And so, I think that's one of the decisions that you all need to make is, a mixed use zone certainly has benefits. And I think that the design and the functioning of a mixed use zone is a little different than an all commercial zone. You might feel that that a mixed use zone that might be a mix of two-family houses, multi-family houses, and commercial that has a control in the size and the scale and the intensity might work well. So I don't think that that's defined yet. I think that you will have to define how you want to go. And some commercial zones, we really want to, my personal opinion on uses is that there are some commercial uses that really need big space. They have big parking lots or high intensity, lots of traffic in and out, which is very different than a small little, two-person office that someone might have. So the scale and the intensity and the function and the aesthetic, how it's laid out, where the parking lot is, all of those things contribute to what you want to accomplish. So you could certainly have either a full solid commercial zone, or you could have a mixed use zone that functions, that pays more attention to how all of those things, the scale and the intensity, interact with each other.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. So I'll try to incorporate that in my comments then. So going through the options in the same way to be a good example here for Patrick to learn from, I guess. Taking it one option at a time. So option one, again, I'll just reiterate the simplicity of it, but the concern that goes with, so the simplicity of it is not only in the simplicity of writing, zoning, but the simplicity of it is also maybe political in the sense that the town of Caroline will be the town of Caroline. It's not, it's not divided up into zones or districts. And so politically that might be more saleable. However, because it treats, the downside is because it treats every location the same, there's very little ability to fine tune anything to influence uses across the town other than multiple overlays. And we've, heard some concerns about how complicated using multiple overlays would be. So I'm not particularly in favor of option one. With option two, which is basically a hamlet zone, including all the hamlets as one zone, and then everything else. Certainly the positive about that is it enables the ability to focus growth in concentrated areas, i.e. the hamlets. So, you know, denser development, residential development, some mix of commercial or retail within those hamlets. But the downside is that not all hamlets are the same, and probably the best thing for the town and the residents is not to have the same uses or you know, the same rules pertaining to every single hamlet. So I think there's some diversity in hamlets and diversity in where we would want to allow and enable and encourage different uses based on zone. With option 3, I like that it allows more guidance regarding individual hamlets, but I think having a zone for each hamlet is a bit of overkill. And I'd suggest perhaps modifying option 3 to do 2 types of hamlets. So like a mixed use, you know, a highly mixed use encouraged hamlet type, which for sure, in my view, would be the Slaterville, West Slaterville corridor. And then more residential based and small business based hamlets, which might be all of the other hamlets. So that development would be focused in the hamlet zones, but there would be like a type 1 hamlet zone and a type 2 hamlet zone. And then everything else, you know, everything else would be the 3rd zone. So there'd be 3 zones. One of my concerns though in that is that we put limits. I mean, I've heard reference in this commission a number of times, including tonight, on you know, encouraging development or fostering development or considering development, at least in the Route 79 corridor. I think it's really critical to put limits on what we mean as the Route 79 corridor. In my view, the Route 79 corridor that should be open to all sorts of development is not Route 79 from the western boundary of the town to the eastern boundary of the town. The Route 79 corridor, in my view, really ought to be concentrated in that Slaterville, West Slaterville kind of hamlet area, you know, and maybe a little bit beyond its current boundaries, but, you know, maybe as far, you know, as far west as whatever that intersection is beyond the school to Thomas Road kind of intersection area, maybe a little bit beyond that. But then, you know, have an eastern boundary as well. And, you know, I don't know my road names well enough to say what that would be, but, you know, kind of bound it so that we don't have sprawl across all of the Route 79 corridor that runs through the town, but rather a concentrated area of mixed use hamlet development where mixed use involves small commercial, you know, offices, perhaps a restaurant, you know, small restaurant, but not, you know, a giant footprint, you know, commercial enterprise, you know, that has massive parking lots, that kind of stuff. But again, a concentrated, you know, concentrated mixed use hamlet area. That's hamlet type 1, and then other hamlets that are more residential, you know, sidewalks, multiple family or single family in the other hamlets with some, you know, some level of small retail. And then option 4, I guess my concern there is that, you know, certainly the benefit of it is that it could confine certain uses, especially commercial, industrial, to certain sections of the town, and that's, in my view, a good thing. But the downside is that large commercial and large industrial uses may not be what the town needs, you know, going into the future. And in my view, doesn't really mesh with some of the comprehensive plan goals of rural character, residential friendly, community building, you know, green construction, you know, all of that. So I would come down to a modified option 3 that has fewer hamlets types, you know, probably 2, you know, as one option for public discussion and stimulating input, and then perhaps a very simple option or a more complex option. And to some degree, it seems in my mind, what I've been hearing from the public comments that we've gotten, through privilege of the floor, is that maybe the idea is to propose something more like option 4, where you would actually have districts that are designated industrial, designated commercial, and see what people say about that. Is that really what residents want in the town of Caroline, or into the future, or not? And that would be a way of stimulating that conversation very, very pointedly, to give us some input. And then I'll just conclude by saying, in the other parts of the decision matrix that Nan and Rick gave us, there was a whole set of questions about what are, regulations, design standards, and et cetera would be needed in any of these scenarios. And I'd really just like to emphasize that there was a lot of thought and public input that went into the design standards update and the site plan review update last fall, that I hope we don't lose track of, and I hope gets incorporated appropriately into this process in the next steps as we go forward.
Thank you, Barb. You got a thumbs up. So, would anyone like to go next? Val. Hi, Val.
Hi, yeah, I put my hand down. Is there a way to do that? Lower hand, yeah. No, I agree with so many of the things that Barb said, actually, that it's almost directly from my notes. I think that to be simple, I think number 1 doesn't meet isn't capable of meeting the goals of the comprehensive plan. In that, by seeing the entire town as one district, the idea of locating development and all those kinds of things is essentially sort of dispersed as continues to be an ad hoc decision-making process. And I don't think that is what the comprehensive plan will allow. I think I tend to agree that 2, with where the hamlets are essentially one thing and the town is something else, is probably not very accurate. Again, that even Slaterville is very different than Whitendale already, and that we probably would want to encourage development, different kinds of development in those 2, from Speedsville, from something else. And I very much so. I have it's funny. Number 3 is I have the most problem with, but also the most sort of enthusiasm for, because number 3, where the hamlets begin to be individual, I can't imagine how one can, first of all, treat that in a democratic system without having everybody in the hamlet voting on their own zonings and beginning to have a regular hamlet zoning commissions that would have to be, make their own sort of decisions in, one way or the other. But also that my experience in the little bit of planning and zoning that I've dealt with is that this is where you can begin to set a kind of pattern of the haves and the have-nots. That by establishing individual zoning things, that some hamlets can find themselves, even by something like frontage requirements or something like that, restricted in ways that prevents the kind of development that they might want to have. And I don't see the point of that. On the other hand, I think what Barb said is exactly the way around that there seem to be 2 kinds of hamlets, and we can define what those 2 hamlets are based upon, certain kind of retail, small scale commercial, of other kinds of business development, walkability, things like sort of things like perimeters of walkable streets, things like that. But that also that tends to imply that a hamlet can move from one category to another. That there is a certain fluidity in those categories as if the hamlets develop it in certain kinds of ways. And we don't prohibit development, but we encourage certain kinds of developments. And we say, well, when you're this kind of hamlet, these are the most appropriate. When you're this kind of hamlet, these are the ones that seem most appropriate. And I mean, I think 4 is, and so I think that one is the best. I think that the overlay situation is really important. And I think multi-use in general is probably important for most of the hamlets, and even maybe some of the town locations. Number 4, I think, would get very difficult to identify to constrain. I mean, if we start drawing boundaries and things, it might be the most difficult of those all. So I find that 3 has the best. I think it seems to be me have the best fit also with the comprehensive plan, and also with what so many of us see as what the future of the town might actually become.
Thanks. Okay, Patrick, I see your hand up.
Hey there. And I apologize for being late for work. I had to be at an Ithaca Planning Board meeting. So I've got lots of local government in my mind tonight. And I also wanted to add that I must not be on the email list yet. So I'm familiar with the 4 maps, but I didn't receive a message. So
Patrick, is your email pbraga@yahoo?
it's not. I'll email you directly just so it's
Or just
not.
send me something in chat.
Yes,
Great.
I'll do that. So I'll say that in general, and this is similar view to what I expressed last time, was that my preference generally is for somewhere between options 2 and 3, but not necessarily the options 2 and 3 maps per se. I think something that's really special about a rural town like Caroline is the open space and the kind of fluidity of land use that can coexist with what's considered a rural character and just people's imagination about how they want to use their land. And the term rural character is something that I've been meditating on a lot over the past 2 weeks, especially thinking about the presence of industry, and industry as it relates to agriculture, other types of commercial and residential uses. Because in one way, I think that, for instance, a residential subdivision has less to do with a prevailing agricultural character than an industrial site. And the reason for that is because what industry and agriculture have in common is that is a kind of stage of production that they're in, right? So there's kind of 3 stages of commercial production that I've kind of arrived at over the past 2 weeks. One is extraction and transformation of raw materials, which is exactly what, for instance, planting corn does. Then there's production and storage. So like producing something that kind of tied to that transformation and storing it, which is when we get grain silos, for instance. And then there's the distribution and sale, which is, I would call retail, as it were, or maybe what happens at farmers markets. And that's the type of commercial that's least present right now in Caroline, except in kind of one-off farm stands. And that maybe that's the kind of commercial that the town might want to place restrictions on, while allowing more of the extraction, transformation, production, and storage, which might actually mean that industry and agriculture can coexist and still promote a rural character. And so that's kind of from the perspective of activities. But I was also thinking about character as a physical built form. I've been particularly enamored with all the multiple unit sites on Harford Road, or multiple building sites on Harford Road. When I was first driving out there to go to Hammond Hill, I was just astonished at the kind of freedom of site plans that ultimately have kind of underlying logics. I don't think my camera will be able to show it very well, but I was studying satellite images of some of these farms out there and residential buildings, and I started noticing that in the absence of zoning, we start getting underlying design logics. People naturally organize their buildings around quads and line them up along datums and even arcs. You get some really interesting site plans where you have buildings around a quad, and then in a kind of parabola, these satellite sheds are scattered about. And so I don't want to lose that freedom of design that we get in the town now, which is why I think that zoning as a general direction for a place like Caroline should focus more on use. And I really don't think we should focus on dimensional requirements at all. Things like unit caps, height limits to some limits, of course, lot coverage, or number of uses or number of primary buildings on a single parcel. I'm really hesitant to support regulation for those things. I think it makes more sense to think about, for instance, Pittsburgh and Boise split up these different factors in their zoning. So I think Pittsburgh has form districts that are separate from use districts. And one precedent for use districts, and I know it's a bit of a dirty word in zoning, but Euclidean zoning at its core, even though nowadays people associate it with segregated use zoning, which is kind of option 4 map, which I don't support. The village of Euclid, Ohio in the 1920s proposed a 6-tier zoning system where every use that was allowed in the zone below was allowed in the next successive zone. So I think use zone 1 was just like, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I think I lost connection for a moment.
Oh.
Did everyone else hear Patrick? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But, yeah, so the way that Euclid, Ohio zoned in the 20s, and this is the Supreme Court case that said that zoning is constitutional nationwide. I think zone 1 was like houses and churches, and zone 2 was houses and churches and banks and retail. Zone 3 was houses and churches and banks and retail and whatever next level until you got like noxious industry at tier 6. So I think that kind of successive zoning might be something that makes sense. And maybe there are uses that overlap in some of these tranches of intensity, which I think is a word that we as planners often use, but I would like to define it further. And I think tying it to car traffic, noise, light, air pollution makes sense. And I think, I don't mean to go on too long. I think I just have 2.5 points more that I'd like to share. One is the notion of hamlet boundaries. I think I agree with Val, who, and forgive me if I'm not capturing what you said correctly, but that there should be some fluidity to hamlets and some sense of when they can grow outward as well as when they can change their use intensity. I would love to see something like in North Carolina in the 1950s, landowners that were within a certain radius of other zoning districts could petition their jurisdiction by right to be rezoned to that without having to go through a complicated variance process. And if we do have distinct hamlet districts, I think it would be awesome if a landowner nearby could say, well, I want to do that kind of development, or I want to protect my property against industrial development, for instance, and make it an extension of the hamlet. I think that should be an option. And in that vein, I think we have to be really careful if we're going to do zoning, which has really specific prescriptions from state law versus just a land use ordinance that's passed locally, is the Board of Zoning Appeals. Because one thing that happens in city of Ithaca, which I've been working in for several years, both professionally and as a student, is that Ithaca confuses zoning waivers and zoning variances. Waivers are something that I first encountered when I was working on a planning board in Michigan, but it allows the planning board to waive certain requirements of zoning under certain conditions, whereas legally, variances really have to be a hardship thing. And so I think, and I know Syracuse has zoning waivers, so I know it's legally possible in New York. And then the last idea that I'll add about thinking about the Route 79 corridor, if we do decide, for instance, that between the boundary of town of Dryden to hamlet of Slaterville, or any other future hamlets that might not be defined in the comprehensive plan, but might be, clusters of residential development that might want to self-identify as hamlets, at least for that stretch of Route 79, that could be a good opportunity for the town of Caroline to think proactively about street design and how to engage this state DOT to ensure safer foot connectivity around the highway. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Would anyone like to go next? I think we have Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. You can go next, and then Michelle.
Okay. Patrick, I really like what Patrick had to say. I like about what everybody had to say, but there's a few things that I'm not real sure about, like option 1. I wasn't sure about a single set of standards for the whole town, although it is very simple, would probably work. That's about all I had to say about 1. Option 2, I think the same standards for all the hamlets would work, but I'm not sure about it. And I'm not real sure about the overlays. I think they make it very complicated. Option 3, there again, I'm not sure if the single set of standards is a real positive thing, but it could work. I don't like really the different standards for each hamlet. I think you would run into a problem with saying to each hamlet that you can only do this, you can only do that. It might create a real problem. Number 4, I was kind of leaning towards 2 and 4, but 4 multiple zoning districts for different areas of the town with different standards. I wasn't really sure about that. I really like the one source overlay, but I think number 4 would be very complicated. I really kind of like the idea of the mixed use zones. And I do believe that like the part of Route 79 from like the town of Dryden line to say Ellis Hollow, where most of the commercial development is already there, that would be probably the commercial zone. But there again, I'm pretty open to a lot of this. I like what everybody had to say, so I'm still looking for the right direction here. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Michelle?
Yeah, I have to agree with Bruce in that I do kind of like what everybody has to say. I think I have the same objections to like the first option. I think in a way that's just too simple. I feel like the overlays are complicated and I still haven't, I haven't gotten a total understanding of how they would work. It seems like by the time you think of, you'd have to develop standards for each overlay, and that seems as complicated to me as option 4, which is setting out specific districts. But maybe I'm not understanding that correctly. And so I think, just to cut to the chase, the one I prefer is option 3. I think it makes sense to treat hamlets differently, but I agree with Bruce that maybe that's problematic. But when I'm thinking of hamlets, I'm thinking of like Caroline Center's a hamlet, and it's really just a crossroads, and I don't see it on the same level as Sladeville Springs and Bessemer is kind of in that category for me. But I live near Caroline Center. I don't live near these other hamlets, but they're different, and I don't see how you can have the same. I don't see how you can treat all the hamlets the same. But I agree that treating them differently might be problematic. So I guess that's not helpful, but that's just my issue. So I guess, yeah, to make a long story short, I think option 4 actually has, in some ways, because it's so prescriptive, I think it's simpler on a certain level. But I think maybe the simplicity causes problems politically and emotionally. But really, sometimes having more specific rules is simpler than having like an overlay that's a little bit squishy and you're not really sure what the rules are. So I agree we shouldn't have a lot of, I agree with what Patrick was saying about not having, restrictions on buildings per se. But I guess in a nutshell, what I'm concerned about, I'm going to speak personally for myself with zoning, is I live in a rural section of Caroline and I have beautiful views. And I live near an area that's, property values aren't too great. But what elevates my property values is that I have this great, beautiful view. And if somebody were to come up and move in next to me and put some commercial enterprise in, that would like totally destroy my property values and my quality of life. And so I'm hoping that zoning can, I don't want to tell people what they can do with their land, but people have to think about their community as far as what they're doing with their land and how it affects everybody, not just their own bottom line. And so I hope that somehow we can come to a plan that lets Caroline develop in an organized way, lets people enjoy their land, and also doesn't sort of leave open ways to just put weird uses in various places, if that makes any sense. So.
Can I?
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
Ernie?
Just because this question continues to come up, is the use of overlay districts. If Nan could just give us a quick little overview of that. I mean, my experience with overlay districts is that, if your property ends up being in an overlay district and your little project is within that district, then it just kicks you into a site plan review or some other set of regulations that you have to address, and it's not necessarily all that complicated because it's just a map and you find where your place is on the map, and then you go to the reg and it says, well, this is what you got to address, and then you do that. But maybe Nan can suggest a little bit better information.
And if I could tag on to that, because actually that was one of the fundamental questions I had today, is to speak, and I know you probably spoke before, but speak again to the relative advantages, disadvantages of getting to the same place with an overlay versus a district, a zone, I should say. I mean, we could have an ag overlay, we could have an ag district, and what would be the relative merits? That probably gets at Aaron's question, I hope.
I'll start off and then let Rick jump in if he's got anything else to add. I think that's that is a really good question. And Rick and I spent a lot of time talking about a zone versus a district. So I think in its simplest answer, Ernie is right, is that you have something that's mapped, say a stream, the stream overlay, that its purpose, the benefit of the overlay is that they're mappable. People can understand that you have a resource that you're trying to protect. And the overlay would say, you're in an overlay and you have to do X. And people say, okay, I'm in the overlay. That means I have to be 50 foot from the stream, or I have to, you know, I have to have a certain kind of siting, or some districts might have a certain density or scale. So there would be a certain development standard that would be targeted to protect that resource. So the development standard for a stream overlay may be different than the development standard for a scenic overlay, which would get at the siting of a structure, you know, from its view from the road. So the benefit is that overlays are targeted to the natural resources that your comprehensive plan specifically outlines wanting to be protected. I agree that when you put all of those overlays together, it's complicated. And you know, yes, that is, if you look at the map of all the overlays, is as complicated as number 4. All of the development standards that you may want to include to protect those resources can be included in the regular zoning language. So you could say, you know, you have to be 50 foot from the stream bank, or you have to be, you know, you can't have, I'm just pulling things out of a hat now because they're just coming to mind. For to protect the scenic views, that you have to have the roof line of the house below the ridge line is seen from the public road, or in an agricultural overlay, you have to develop your subdivision or your building footprint so it is out of the prime farmland soils, just to, you know, pull a few out examples. So all of the standards that would be associated with the overlay can be included in a regular zone. It's just that the overlay, when you connect it to the map, it's something more definable. Then we would have to have the same map so that people will say, well, what stream is regulated, and am I near the stream, and where is 50 feet? So I think the overlay, they've been developed over time because they're oriented to those natural resources. And some communities are more focused on how things, you know, the siting and the function of things in relationship to protecting those resources. So, you know, I think Rick and I had the same discussions that you are having about, you know, is it better to have the standards just incorporated into the text? I think the overlays just help you fine tune where those are. I don't know if that totally gets at your answers. Rick, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think that covers it well. You know, option 4 was basically drawn after I'd done all the overlays. So, you know, the green district in option 4 was the best fit, if you will, for the environmental resources overlay. And in drawing that, you know, one benefit you can see about you know, the overlays versus the districts is, you know, with the districts, you could have a 100-acre parcel that has some natural resources in it, some agricultural resources in it, some scenic views, etc. And if you're only going to zone it one thing, you need to decide, well, are we going to zone it, you know, rural conservation? Are we going to zone it agriculture? Are we going to split the parcel in half, which creates, headaches for reviews and things like that? Or it can be one zoning district, but then you have the environmental resource overlay, you have the ag resources overlay. And so for the portion of the property that's in that particular overlay, you look at one set of standards. For the portion that's in a different set, you look at those standards. So, as Nan said, you've got these resources mapped. In some ways, it does make it, yes, it looks crazy when you have all the resource or the overlays turned on one map. But when you are just zoomed in on your one particular property you want to look at, saying, okay, the southeast corner has an overlay on it, that's either, I'm going to site my development away from that or not, as opposed to I'm in the X district, now I need to look at, okay, where are my streams, where are my wetlands, where's these prime soils, things like that. So, yes, so it looks more complicated with the overlays, but it's hopefully not necessarily more complicated for the landowner when they want to go ahead and propose some sort of development, or the review board when they want to review the development.
And I just would add that I think whether you go with overlays or not, you could incorporate either way the standards that you would need to put in place to protect those resources. So either way, they could be incorporated. I think that, you have to look at it, that we're not gonna, if you don't go with the overlay, one or more of them, doesn't mean we're skipping protection of whatever that resource is. We would build that in a different way. Bill, does that answer and Ernie, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of how I understand it to work. That, basically overlays kind of came about once GIS mapping made them possible. And I think it's a great thing. And the way they seem to be used, I think, is very useful in terms of regulating environmental impacts particularly.
Thank you, Ernie. I wanted to say that I think the nice part about having things both in writing and in overlay is it is helpful for people who see things in different ways. People who learn through words and people who learn through images. We're going to, Patrick, I see you have your hand up. Is it to ask a question?
Are you going to get
we have
comments
nothing.
from Will?
Yeah, that's going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
We have one more
That was
person to
exactly
speak,
what
so.
I was asking for. Was Will hasn't spoken yet, so let me put Will in next. I thought I'd said that, but maybe people didn't hear me. Go ahead, Will.
Thanks. Hopefully the quality of the sound is okay. I don't really want to speak to each option because I think people have thought it through much more thoroughly than I have in a lot of ways. What is troubling, though, to me is I don't think we have a workable definition for commercial and industrial. And so I start to feel like, yeah, I agree with that, and I agree with that, and I agree with that. And then someone says something about commercial, and I have 3 tenants. One of them maybe could be considered industrial, and they're housed in an old barn. So, which part of that do you really object to? And what's great about this tenant, who happens to be a lighting fixture fabricator, is that
I think we're having a very
and for
hard time
other
hearing you.
people too. So I bring this up because I'm so sorry. When I talk, Is it better?
Yes, that's better.
Now you're frozen though.
Okay, so I just don't. I think no matter which scenarios we choose to we should have some working definitions of commercial because it's real conversation. Because I'm left going, are you talking about my guys? Are you talking about these are things? These are tenants that are I could be found in Hay, and my tenants. That's just an illustration of why I think it's really important to come up with a definition of commercial and industrial. Not something we have to keep forever, but just to start with. And also, I really appreciate the comments people have made. Maybe said it first, or maybe Patrick, about fluidity, because just in the 12 years that I have been here, I would say Brooktondale has changed a lot. Just very different from 12 years ago. So I wanted to make that point. And also, the last point maybe, well, no, two more points. I've noticed in talking to people that neighborhoods are really important in our town. It's not that people really do get to know their neighbors, and it makes a huge difference. So that's smaller than the hamlets. They exist, and there's definitely neighborhood. The whole concept of cluster housing still escapes me because, for instance, I would be outside of a cluster. I would love to share my view with a couple of other homes. And then I'm left going, well, how does that all work? Because I could easily property and we would all have this amazing view with very little disruption to anybody else. But I wouldn't be in the hamlet, any hamlet. So it's so, again, I think some fluidity or flexibility makes all the difference in how I view all those options.
Thank you, Will.
That's it. Thank you.
I'm still having a hard time hearing Will. Can people tell me if they can hear Will by raising their hands like this? Is it clear? It's mixed. We'll see how it comes out in the tape.
Yeah,
I think both Tim and Barbara have their hand up. I think, and I think Patrick did before. So I'm going to go Patrick, Barbara, Tim, and then I will try to add my own points before we end this thing. But I have some assignments I want to add. So give you like 2 minutes.
Keep my comments brief. 2 points. One is about residential clusters and the other one's about view sheds. I totally agree with Will about the idea of thinking about residential clusters and what that means outside of the hamlet districts. I don't have a super strong view of it other than from personal experience living in the Boyceville cottages and seeing it kind of excluded from any hamlet designation. It does make me wonder, like, what does it mean to be like a clustered neighborhood where I do know my neighbors and pet their dogs like outside of a hamlet setting? And also, what do places with existing housing clusters, like the parts bounded by Valley and Burns roads, why aren't those considered part of like an extension of the Brooktondale hamlet, for instance? And whether, even though I know that the hamlets exist for really strong historical purposes, whether as an exercise we might want to abandon the label briefly and just think about that like residential clusters to begin with. And then the second idea that I had was in terms of viewshed protection. I think a really strong point that came out in Nan and Rick's description of overlays is that those are the places where it feels most appropriate to have really targeted dimensional standards. Again, being really careful about the types of restrictions that we even consider putting on dimensions in a rural setting. But I think in terms of viewshed protection, there's this irony in that short buildings can block more view sometimes than tall buildings. And a great example, which came up in public comment last time, was the storage units blocking the view from Route 79 of the Woolseyville Valley. It's because they're short one-story buildings that the view is blocked. If they were all in one 5-story building where, like the same height as a grain silo, where the rest of the view is open, that view would be preserved. Whereas whenever I go jogging on Burns Road and see that amazing view northward of the town, from that kind of upward looking down vantage point, shorter buildings make sense to preserve view. So I wanted to put those comments there.
Thank you, Patrick. Barbara, then Tim, then Bill.
Thank you. 2 points. One is just in response to Patrick's comment about, for example, Boyceville not being included in Hamlet. I think we should all keep in mind that the boundaries that are drawn on the maps right now are all tentative. There's nothing final about those boundaries. It could very well be that Boyceville would be part of a hamlet. So let's not get tied up in seeing lines on the map and drawing conclusions about what's in or what's out of a particular area. But my question that I wanted to ask was, what is our obligation to consider the zoning districts in neighboring towns that border the town of Caroline? And do we have any obligation to have particular zoning in those areas that are adjacent to other towns that have established zoning?
I think we talked about this early on, and I think we've realized that Danby has zoning, and we should definitely look at that.
And Dryden, right?
And Dryden has zoning. In Tioga, I don't think the town we adjoin has zoning.
But has anybody looked to see what Danby and Dryden zone right along our border and what that means for what we can or should be considering?
I have not yet, but we had noted that, and we also have the town of, I think that's it for towns. Am I correct?
Because that, in my view, that certainly influences what we're talking about, you know, in terms of, you know, do we have one big zone? Well, maybe not if what we have to do on the border doesn't allow us to do that. So I'd like to understand what, you know, legally and ethically our obligations are before we get too far down the path of talking about multiple zones or where the boundaries of different zones might be.
Let me just jump in, is that legally, you're not obligated to take their zoning into consideration. You only have the power to zone within your borders. So you could do something totally different from them, or you could be similar to them. So you don't have an obligation. And I'm not sure I would say ethically, is maybe philosophically, should you though look and be aware of what's going on around you? Absolutely, because what they do influences what's happening in town. You're not an island in and of yourself. And so your point is well taken, that we should definitely look and see what the zones are on other sides of the community. And that might influence your decision. You know, if Danby has a commercial zone just on the other side of the boundary, you might decide, well, that's okay. That's really where you want commercial development to go, and you don't want it to be in town. So, or they could have something that is totally, you know, opposite of what you might want to consider in Caroline. So I think philosophically and ethically, if you want to call it that, yes, we definitely should look, and I'll make sure that Rick and I take a look at that. But you can only make decisions for yourself.
Okay.
Thank you. So sooner rather than later on that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, yep, I've got it started.
Okay. Tim?
Yeah, just very, very briefly. There's been discussion of various is the Route 79 corridor tonight, and I just might mention that the one area that the town board has received the most concentrated feedback about is the western side of the Route 79 corridor, roughly, let's say from Snyder Hill Road west, where we've received enormous input to try to keep that non-commercial. So I think there are just some different perspectives about that, but because that's come to the town board, I thought I'd mention it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Bill?
Okay, and am I able to share screen? I don't know if I have that power.
I think that Mark can let you do that.
So Mark, can you? I'll just try right now.
You're good, Bill.
Okay, great. Because this is sort of apropos to what a lot of people have been saying, Barb, and what Tim just mentioned. So this happens to be just zoning possibility 4. And in terms of a couple things, the Route 79 corridor, so here's 79 coming along here. You guys can see my cursor, I hope. So the existing sort of boundary of Slaterville Springs is sort of here. Here's Midline Road, you know, and the town hall's kind of in here. And this hamlet zone extended a long way here because you guys were allowing for future expansion. One question I have for Nan and Rick is, if you look at the prime farmland, that takes up this new color on here is the prime farmland. You know, so in terms of fluid, in terms of like the zones aren't set yet, I would really want that hamlet to spread eastward, not westward. And that also sort of takes to what Tim was mentioning, that here in the triangles are a few businesses that have cropped up, right? That's like Celebrations, and then there's the storage, and then there's Carson's, and then this is what used to be Archie Natch Cars or something else. So you guys put a commercial district here, which I think is possible. But indeed, when there was a proposal to put a commercial enterprise somewhere in here, there was a lot of discussion at the moratorium hearing about, we don't want this whole corridor to be developed. And I think that that's a key point. We heard a lot of feedback from the town about that. So I don't, my own view would be that this hamlet zone should be extended this way. We should try to preserve this, not just for the view, for the good farmland. And yeah, I think that the key question to Tim's point is, yeah, this stretch of 79 here probably needs to stay non-commercial. And what do we do about here? So that's just some of the, I know the devil's always in the details. I just wanted to throw that map up there so people can sort of have that in their head. But I think, yes, we need to start fine tuning the hamlet boundaries, and we residents of the town sort of, having good feedback on that. And to that point, I think Bruce mentioned about like us determining what the hamlets do. I think it really, really, really would be a lot of public feedback is needed for what the rules are in particular hamlets, or what the guidelines or the regulations are. It's not just us. There should be a lot of public feedback, and we're not going to get to that part of the meeting, I know, but I certainly have some strong thoughts on gathering public input. But here we are, almost 9 o'clock. But anyway, I will stop sharing my screen, but that was just what I wanted to say is that, yeah, we need to work on all the
Thank you.
details of the boundaries.
I'm going to say, we're going to jump in here and say what I like without being too repetitive. I very much agreed with Barbara's suggestion that there be 2 kinds of hamlet zones, perhaps Slaterville Springs at this point and the others. I just think that simplifies things a great deal. I also like option 3. I like the overlays. I think they can be confusing to people, but I also think if you have the words in one area and the overlays in another, it makes it much easier for some people to understand what they're looking at. I am going to take the last 7 minutes of this meeting and suggest something that Tim had suggested, that in order to get our work done and move along, we may, I'm going to try to ask people if they would work on a couple of things. And there are 5 things that I've written down so far. One is to really look at the purposes. I'd ask people to look at that, but we haven't had a chance to discuss it. The second is preparation for public meeting. The third is this kind of definitions. I know that Nan can supply a lot of definitions to us, but I'd like to get at least for us a list of what the kind of definition that we're looking for.
Do we just lose Jean?
Looks that way.
I think so.
I believe so.
I just chatted her. I don't know if she's,
Tried to get,
there she is.
There she is.
Jean, you're muted.
You're muted, Jean.
okay. What I will try to do is tomorrow morning, send out that list and ask for some volunteers to take on being in some small groups over the next 2 weeks and come back to the next meeting and report. So for instance, I'll just describe, and I'll write this down, like the purposes. We have the purposes that we've written. Now that we've discussed as we have so far, looking at those purposes and see if they make sense or if there's something we need to add to them. That's one. Preparation for the public meeting. There were some things I put in the last, the minutes for the last meeting, but I'd like somebody to pull all of that together and so that we have a document that we can forward as we're beginning to think about that, and definitions as a third group. So if that's okay with you, I will send that out tomorrow, ask for volunteers to join, and you can figure out, you could meet at the Brooksondale Community Center on a picnic table, or you could meet at the town hall if you wanted to at some time over the next couple of weeks. Does that sound good?
What were 4 and 5? We
4
missed
and
that
5
when you cut
were
it.
residential clusters was 4, and 5 was hamlets. Okay, so I will send that out. It might get done tonight, it might not. I'm going to try to get it done because I'm having cataract surgery tomorrow morning, and so I don't know if I'll actually be able to see by tomorrow evening or not. So we'll see. But I should be able to see much better soon. So I think that is there anything anyone else wants to add before we adjourn?
Yeah, this is Bruce. I will not be at the next meeting. I will try to be on Zoom, but I don't believe I will be able to because I'll be in Colorado in the mountains. So hopefully I'll see you the next one.
Well, good. Have a wonderful time.
Thank you.
Jean, one other suggestion that I had that folks might consider is whether you consider having 2-hour meetings instead of 1.5-hour meetings, just given the.
Yes, you're right. I've forgotten to talk about that. So I will send that out in my note as well and see how people respond to that. Okay, so I will do that tonight. Bill, I see your finger up.
Yeah, thank you. So you're great. Jean, should I just go ahead and ask Rick my question right now, or do you want to go ahead and?
No, go ahead. We've got 3 more minutes.
Okay. So Rick, and I expect you may not know this off the top of your head because amazing as you are, you can't possibly remember everything. So for the viewshed map, when you mapped the viewshed, did you go back to the Tompkins County source, which is the Tompkins County, visual resources document? And they have 3 different levels of views. Did you use all 3 levels of like the distinctive characteristic, and I can't remember the other noteworthy views? Do you remember any of that? Because I know the comp plan did not map all of those different points.
Right. I used whatever points they gave me. I'll say that.
Well, so who's the they?
The county.
Okay, the county gave you stuff. Okay.
Yep.
Next question.
I don't recall if it was all 3 tiers or if it was only certain tiers, but I want to say it was like 20 something points.
Well, yeah. So if you could check that for me, because there's 23 what they call, I think, characteristic views, and another 5 which are between noteworthy and something other one. And those smaller set are what are considered the most special. And so my other follow-up question is, how hard would it be? And this would be for the zoning commission side, they wanted it to do 2 different maps, one that uses the 5 most special points and the other that uses like either all the points or the 23 less special points. Is that a big ask or is that a small ask?
No, it's since it's already more or less set up to run another run another view shed with just those 5 points isn't a huge deal. So we could do that, yes.
All right, if you could let either me or Jean know what the points were for sure, and then I'll ask the committee if they want to do anything different than we have. So thanks.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Val just reminded me that the next meeting is not in 2 weeks, it's in 3 weeks. It's September 14th and then the 28th. On September 14th, I will also be in Colorado, but I should be in a motel with internet. And then I go into the mountains, though I am not meeting up with Bruce.
Clandestine rendezvous.
And then I'll be back for the 28th. So unless Bruce, you and I can talk offline and see if we should meet each other while we're there. So,
Bring your notes.
in my notes, okay. Sounds good. I want to say thank you to Nan and to Rick and to everyone on the committee. I really think we made a lot of progress tonight in talking these things through and thinking about these options. So I will see you in 3 weeks. I will be on Zoom. I hope some people will be able to be at town hall. We'll see. Let's all stay safe out there. Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.